Good to go. I can't be more excited that we have a full room for a copyright workshop. That makes me happier than I can possibly say. We were a bit concerned that after all of the fascinating panels that have gone on this week, that the idea of copyright law may not attract you. But we promise that the objective of this session is to excite you about copyright law and inform you of all the things that can help in this new kind of emerging world of more and more pictures and videos coming online. So I will introduce myself. I'm Jenni Sargent. I am the director of Eyewitness Media Hub. I'm also the managing director of First Draft. Those of you who've been at the conference for the last couple of days may have seen other sessions. I promise you it's our last one. We're so grateful to the festival for having us. We've had so much to talk about. We've talked graphic imagery, we've talked verification, discovery, and now we're doing copyright law. So we have a website, firstdraftnews.com. Everything you need to know about what we do is on there. But yes, we've had a brilliant festival, and we feel very privileged considering the high caliber of everyone who has spoken and all the stuff that we've learned ourselves. Making sure that's working. With me is one of my favourite people in the world, Adam Rendle. He's a senior associate. Maybe that's a bit much to share so publicly. He is a media lawyer, I'd say senior associate at the law firm Taylor Wessing. The reason he's my favourite person in the world is because he's given us so much support in the work that we do, based around some of the research we're looking at, and just giving us general guidance in how we can help newsrooms kind of navigate some of these issues. So yes, couldn't do our work without him. Just to get started, if any of you saw my tweet about 10 minutes ago, this is to set the scene, and this is to remind you all why copyright is important. So before Adam launches in to some really valuable advice, I just want to see some raised hands in the room. Did you run this photo in your output? Do you know from your newsrooms? If there are students in the room, perhaps would you have run this photo when this news story emerged last week? Or perhaps even the week before? I don't know if you... Looks like nobody did. Again, who's going to put their hand up in front of a lawyer? Right. Basically, just to recap, I don't know how far this story spread. I should imagine quite far. Does anybody in the room not know the story behind the photograph? Okay. I was then going to ask, did you seek permission, and who did you credit? But considering none of you ran it, no need. So obviously, there's lots and lots of interesting things to discuss around this photo. And before we go into that, I'm just going to hand over to Adam just to go through some of the basics of copyright law that we'll be kind of plugging back into throughout the discussion.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. That's very kind words, Jenny, particularly as you said that I was one of your favourite people at the start, and then I was your favourite person by the end of your introduction, so that is very kind of you indeed. I guess to some extent you have a lawyer talking and you automatically think bad news, or that's not going to be very interesting or helpful. Hopefully that will, I'll be able to dispel those myths. I've been talking and advising on UGC and news for a few years now, and the more I think about it, the more I think it comes down to two key things that, that a lawyer and legal advice can provide. And that's firstly around risk, and secondly around building the strategies and processes to mitigate the risk. You know, identifying risks, working out where they're highest, working out which ones you can take, working out what might go wrong if those risks come about. Secondly, how can we build strategies, build processes for making the best and safest legally compliant use of UGC, eyewitness media. And as part of those two things, there are 5 key points I think we should bear in mind to avoid legal difficulties, and those are copyright verification, permissions, the fair dealing, fair use aspect, the importance of crediting, and last, the cost of it going wrong. Before I get into those 5 key areas, the basics. It's in the title of the session. The first C word, copyright. It underlines everything I'm going to talk about. And the key point is that it protects user-generated content. Just because it's on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on Twitter or whichever platform we're talking about, it doesn't mean that there is no copyright. There is copyright, and that copyright it remains in the hands of the person who created the footage. It's not YouTube's copyright, for example. 4 more C words: control, credit, cache, conversations. Control, that's what copyright gives. Copyright gives the ability for the owner to control what, where, why, how, when, for how long, etc. Credit, it gives people the ability to say, you've got to put my name against this. This might be all they want, or it might be the last thing you should do, and we'll explore that. Thirdly, it gives the ability for people to ask for cash. Now, I know there's a whole sort of ethical piece around should people be paying for eyewitness media in a breaking news situation. But clearly there is some UGC that is valuable, and certainly people are becoming very aware of the potential value of their content. You know, it's a simple proposition as, well, you're making money out of my content, why shouldn't I? I think there's a lot of truth in that. And finally, the last C, conversations. Conversations are what turn a copyright work, a piece of user-generated content, into something you can actually use. Those conversations have to happen quickly and have to happen in a robust, reliable way. And that requires preparation. And we'll come on to discuss that. So the first point around copyright verification. There's been a lot of sessions about verification more generally. But this is going to a very specific part of the verification jigsaw. And there are 3 questions that need to be asked. Who owns the copyright in the UGC? The important thing to realize is that the uploader, the person whose account you find the content on, might not be the person who owns the copyright. The person who owns the copyright is the person who created it, who took the video, who took the picture. So in that verification process and investigating who owns it, i.e. from whom should I seek permission, the question isn't, is this your video? The question should be, did you take this video? Because that's the person from whom you should be seeking permission. The second point, was it the owner who made the content publicly available? We'll come on to discuss a very recent example of where this wasn't the case. Again, the Twitter profile that you see might have the content on it, but it might not be their content to have done that with. And what you could be doing then is seeking permission from the wrong person, which is just a complete waste of time. The third point is you have to verify whether there are any third-party rights embedded in that content. That third-party right might be someone else's copyright work. So if this is a meme or a mashup or a fan version of something, very easy for there to be material from a TV show or some music, for example. You won't be able to clear that copyright by asking the person who uploaded it to their Twitter feed. And secondly, there might be privacy implications. The footage might be showing people doing private things in which they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And you can't clear that privacy interest by asking the person who took the photo. You need to go beyond that and be thinking about the person who is featured in the clip and whether the permission has been sought from them. So 2 points on process around that then. That verification and the questions I've been alluding to have to be, the discipline has to be built into workflows and the training process in newsroom. And another point to mention, embedding is a copyright safe way of doing things, but even then you still have to be thinking, for example, about the privacy implications. And I think if you do the copyright verification, it's a bit of a plug for copyright verification. If you do that well, then you're also doing well the more general verification that you need to be doing. For example, is this picture a hoax? Is this picture a scrape from somewhere else? If you've done the copyright verification correctly, you might have been able to debunk a myth.
So going back to our example, having had that very condensed summary of copyright law, this was known as the hijacker selfie, and there was much debate online about the fact that it obviously isn't a selfie. We can see their hands visibly. Ben Innes, who was some call him brave, others call him crazy. God, I have no idea what I would say to him if I met him. He obviously didn't take the photo. So in terms of the three questions that Adam just raised, who owns the copyright? Well, in theory, the person who owns the copyright is the member of cabin crew who took that photograph. Now, we saw how many news organisations use this photograph. I'm not convinced that one of them would have sought permission to use that photograph by the member of cabin crew. I would also wager that some news organisations got in touch with Ben Innes and said, can we use your photo? And he said, sure. Because even if they did seek permission, were they seeking permission from the right person? Were they seeking permission from the copyright owner? Actually, as Adam will go on to discuss, the thing I'm beginning to really enjoy, believe it or not, about law is it's not as black and white as I thought it was. It's not as straightforward as saying copyright, yes, it's copyrighted, no, it isn't. There's lots of lovely words that I appreciate, which is sort of fairness and reasonable and appropriate. And there may be arguments in this case that it would be reasonable to assume that he commissioned the photograph by handing his phone to the person who took the photo. So Adam obviously can speak about that in more detail, but that's what makes this case so interesting for me. And then the second point, was it the owner who made it publicly available? Well, no, it wasn't. It was friends. I mean, he sent a WhatsApp message of this photograph to his friends, and one of those friends, and I think also his sister, posted it to Twitter. So he didn't make it publicly available, even if he was it was reasonable to assume that he was the copyright owner. And the third question that Adam raises, are there any third-party rights embedded? I'm not convinced that the hijacker could claim any rights to privacy in this case. But obviously anybody appearing in a photograph like that perhaps could argue that. Is there anything that you want to add?
Just the one point around the commissioning aspect, that we don't know who the stewardess is, and it would be very difficult to find out who it is, and to get in touch with him or her. Well, I suppose her, given we're calling her a stewardess. But I think one can sensibly take a position that he has got the ability to give permission to use his photo because he asked the stewardess for her to take it. So as Jenny was saying, that there are ways that as a lawyer we can rely on his permission in this circumstance.
So the other interesting thing that actually it was Adam who raised this point to me. On the day of the hijacking, that was very much the story. The story was that a plane had been hijacked. And so in terms of newsrooms' rights, and again, Adam will go into this in more detail, in terms of rights to use a photograph or video that can helpfully be in the public interest to explain what's happening in the story, then all sorts of considerations then would apply. But then the day afterwards, this video emerged, which was when actually it was the selfie photograph itself that became the story. So the day before it was the hijacking. Then the next day, the story was actually the fact that this photograph existed. And that changes in terms of whether it's appropriate then for news organisations to claim that it's in the public interest to see this video. The reason I use this particular example is because many times we're asked, okay, well, we're not going to use the video because we recognise that, it's a grey area, but we can use a screen grab of the video. Do you still need to seek permission to use a screen grab of a video, Adam?
Yes. Drum roll.
And very rarely does Adam just say yes with no, but perhaps. So actually, that's just a straightforward. That's a straightforward yes. And here you can see that the credit. It says POW NL Twitter, because whoever was using this screen grab decided that they would do that kind of best practice and make sure they were crediting, but they were actually crediting the Dutch chat show who shared the video from their Twitter account. And then they added Twitter just to let everybody know that that was the source. But of course, they're not crediting the person who captured the video, who is the owner of the copyright, who is the person that needs to be credited. So, all of that kind of attempt to... it's the difference between crediting to alert people of where you found it versus crediting the copyright owner. And I think in many cases, this is a helpful direction to say this is where we found the video or photograph, but it's absolutely not. That little copyright C that they've added in front, it means that that's not the copyright owner that they're actually crediting.
And it shows, I suppose, that the copyright verification, if any hadn't been carried out here. And if it had been carried out, it hadn't been carried out correctly because it got the wrong answer as to who owns the copyright in this video.
And then the story moved on from being the hijacking on day 1, the photo itself on day 2, to Ben Innes himself on day 3 and beyond. Obviously, newsrooms were fascinated by this character and started to dig deeper into his lifestyle and start speaking to some of his friends. So the next thing they do is look for photographs online that can illustrate their stories about him. This particular one they took from LinkedIn, but it's okay because they credited Benjamin Innes, LinkedIn. And yet again, it's not Benjamin Innes because he didn't take it himself unless he's got ridiculously wonky arms. This belonged to somebody else. And when Adam and I discussed this yesterday, he referenced an equivalent being, say, the pilot of the Germanwings plane. There will always be instances where individuals will be in the news. And the quickest way for journalists to be able to find images to illustrate their story is to go onto social media. If a professional photographer had taken this image, if it had been a wedding photograph or a school photograph, it's much more likely that the professional photographer would see this circulating and say, that's my photo, I know the rights of photography ownership. But it's unlikely that Ben Innes' friend would know those rights. So it's also another question for Adam. In this point about, do the social networks ever own the photograph? By crediting LinkedIn, does that make a difference?
The social networks, as I mentioned earlier, don't own the copyright in the images that are uploaded to them. And the question on the slide, it would be, the answer is normally no, because what justification is there for using this? What's the sort of the public interest defence behind using this photo of him just to illustrate the fact that this is what Ben Innes looks like? Well, we know what he looks like because he was in a selfie, or not in a selfie. So it's interesting that this practice is about as widespread as they come. But it'd be very interesting to actually do a study and work out how many people have asked permission to use profile pictures of other pictures on the platforms.
Just leading on to that, I'm interested in the financial risk to newsrooms, because I wonder how many people really do know this, but actually, what in reality are the kind of damages that a photographer could claim? And is it that, in theory, if you were going to pay Getty Images £50, how much could a copyright owner realistically claim? And therefore, it's not worth the newsroom having to be concerned.
Because there are two situations to distinguish. The first one is a situation where, probably more at the agency level, where they themselves are monetizing the image or the video, selling licenses against it, or potentially running advertising against it in a pre-roll ad, for example, where there's a definite revenue being generated from a photograph or a video. In those circumstances, the profit that is made from that infringing use can be claimed by the copyright owner. So that could be, whatever money has been made would have to be paid out. In a situation that doesn't involve those scenarios, but is just a use of the image or video in a TV show or on a website or whatever, then we're down more to the sort of reasonable license fee type approach, and we'll talk later about the values of some of these claims in the US. But it's going to cost more than it would have cost to do a sort of Getty Corbis type editorial one-off license use. Very difficult to quantify. And Jenny alluded to the risk of using professional photographers, and if anyone's ever received a complaint from a professional photographer about unlicensed use of their image, that's a very difficult claim to get away with without having to pay a decent chunk of money.
So now let's talk a little bit more about permissions. There was an excellent session immediately before this one run by colleagues from the First Draft Coalition looking into the ethics of seeking permission around, particularly during breaking news events, but really in any instance when you're looking to use content that has been created by a source unrelated to the newsroom and often on social media. The screen grab here illustrates the kind of language that the recipients receive. Anyway, Adam.
So from a legal perspective, I would always suggest that obtaining permission should be the default for at least 3 reasons. First, it removes uncertainty. You might be arguing that there's some sort of exceptional defence you can rely on, but if you get a permission, then you're cutting out that uncertainty. Secondly, to treat creators fairly. If you're trying to build up a regular contributors or sort of trust amongst your community, amongst your readers, it seems to me that we should be treating them fairly. And thirdly, it gives the ability to use, if you are relying on an exception, for example, current events, well, that event isn't going to be current forever. If you want to go back and use that image in future, then get a permission up front. And I mentioned at the end, developing the process for recording that permission. So you have these sort of automated tweets or sort of quasi-automated tweets that you see here. And then recording that for future use. There are risks, of course, and we as Jenny mentioned, there was a session earlier about the ethics of doing that, and bombarding people with permission requests in the immediate aftermath can be very uncomfortable from an ethical standpoint. The creator might request money. The creator might deny the permission, which raises the practical risk. And you might not actually get your future uses out of it. A very important point, a creator can always withdraw their permission later down the line. So a permission once sought, and just a bare permission that we're seeking on the social platforms, can be withdrawn later on, unless there has been some sort of contract formed to bind that permission. My last point on this slide around the process is the importance of communicating clearly and not using jargon. Now, we have an example in this one of CNN platforms and affiliates. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I don't understand what CNN affiliates means. And here we are again. Now, it strikes me that these permission requests are pretty imprecise and don't necessarily give the requester the level of comfort that they would actually want. If you're going to go to the trouble of seeking permission, then you should try and get the permission that's going to work best for you and get the wording right. So we take the example on the left. Can I get permission from you to use your photos? What does that mean? All photos ever? For the whole time they've had the Twitter account? And then there's the point about platforms and affiliates. And you see, the perpetuity there. That's got to be a word that people not ordinary people, particularly in a crazy breaking news situation, wouldn't understand. And it just strikes me that if you're confusing people and they're not giving the most informed consent, that's only going to cause problems later on when they see the use that you think you've cleared, and then the eyewitness says, I had no, what on earth why is my video appearing in Australian news? I'm here in Italy. Why are my relatives in Australia saying, I've just seen your video? Well, I didn't understand it. Why did it get there? I'm going to withdraw my permission. So you've kind of shot yourself in the foot by not seeking the sort of sensible, clear and robust permission up front.
Just a couple of other comments on that. At Eyewitness Media Hub, we did some research with focus groups about how they responded to this kind of language when we sort of showed them a series of examples. And of course, many of them said, oh, well, I would have said yes, but that suggests to me that they want money. That suggests that they're intending to sell it. There's a vast difference in terms of language when it comes to, we would like to report your story, we would like to use this to illustrate the news event that you've experienced, versus, please, can we license your content to use on platforms and affiliates in perpetuity? That just suggests that you are fully preparing to sell that content, and immediately made them skeptical. Interestingly, the one on the left, it's exactly as Adam described. This tweet wasn't sent in response to a photograph. It was sent about 3 hours later into the Brussels attacks, and the witness had posted 5 photographs in total that morning. And obviously by the time the journalist had identified them, quite rightly got in touch and said, can we use your photos, which is why it's plural, because he'd posted all 5. But then that just seems such a broad a broad request, considering, when does it start? Was it from last night when I arrived, or, and how long does it go on to, exactly as Adam described? But regardless of all of our evidence to the contrary, they both said yes.
Just one final point on that. If you then look to the future and you're recording the fact of the permission having been granted, and you want to put it in your content management system, for example, to record the fact that permission has been granted, this is a very imprecise way of doing that. So, you 2 weeks later down the line, you say, oh, well, we've got permission, haven't we? Look at the tweet, and you say, well, I have no idea what this tweet actually relates to. So the permission is kind of worthless, later on, which is the whole point of getting the permission, as I say, to get the future use. But actually, a permission like this doesn't necessarily get you there. I feel very bad that we're being so mean about CNN.
I could have blurred out the name, I suppose. But for me, it's really important because it's not specific to any one platform. One of the things raised earlier in the eyewitness session around ethics was that everybody's doing this, and we all know there's a real problem with bombarding eyewitnesses during breaking news events. We all know they receive hundreds and hundreds of requests for interviews and information anyway. So why on earth we would have to add to that by tweeting permission requests, particularly if the permission requests are worthless? That, I think, is a real problem, because we either say, well, it's the only way to gain permission and we need to gain permission, so we will join, the list of journalists getting in touch, or we can say we can at least reduce the contact that these eyewitnesses receive by 50% by taking out anyone who's interested in using the photo and leaving only the journalists who are interested in seeking further information. But having said that, permission does need to be sought. So I wonder if this is a good alternative. This very kind chap during Brussels said to all press, please feel free to use any of my photos or video that I post on Twitter or Facebook, crediting myself and Euractiv. Bingo. Does that work? Is that legally binding? Can newsrooms use that?
Newsrooms can rely on that insofar as it remains live. Whether it's binding on him is a different matter. It would be open to Evan to withdraw his permission later down the line because there's not been a sort of a binding agreement reached. But Evan is clearly quite a sophisticated user. I find it ironic, however, though, that he might have done this to prevent his Twitter notifications going crazy. But then, as you can see on the right of the slide, he got a load anyway. So it didn't quite have the impact that he was seeking.
Yeah, and I wonder actually whether that's exactly as I just described. Those requests to get in touch were more for further information than they were for permission. And I think it is just me. I haven't found anyone else to support my idea yet, so feel free to come with me on the hashtag #UseForNews, because I'm feeling like if we can get that as popular as FF for Follow Friday, and then eyewitnesses just do #UseForNews, and then all you have to do is set up a TweetDeck column with Use for News, and no one needs to be bothered ever again. And we kind of joke about that, but there might be something in it in terms of educating the eyewitnesses as to what they need to do to control their own rights, particularly during a breaking news situation, and how comfortable they are so they don't receive these requests. Quickly before we carry on, any questions so far? Yes. Can we just wait for a microphone, I think?
I just want to know, what do you think if I introduce a simple word more to your 4 or 5 words, cynicism?
Okay. So, cash, copyright, conversation, cynicism. Do you want to expand a bit more in terms of you think the eyewitnesses become cynical of the newsrooms? I think that's exactly right, and I think reputationally there is an issue to suggesting with this jargon that there will be money made or that there's no real respect for the creators' their rights to their content.
Hi, Nikki Usher with George Washington University. Quick question about, so this is only, I just want to be double, triple sure, this is really only with visual content, right? So if you're just like scraping a tweet or something, you don't have to
No,
do this.
it could apply to a tweet, 140 characters worth of text could equally be protected by copyright,
So
certainly in the EU.
Okay, so you could say, can I use what you just said on Twitter, Right, so that's what you could do it for text. Okay, that's what I wanted.
Yeah, so we've been talking about videos and pictures because I suppose that's where the kind of practical focus is, and the examples are better on that, I suppose. But yeah, it apply equally to tweets or blogs or whatever form of textual content.
And there's just another question at the back.
Hey, Adam. Hey, Jenny. James here from Samdesk. Adam, why does, when you said the screenshot of the tweet doesn't count as a legal record, is that purely because it's a screenshot or because they didn't include the original content above that? So if I were to take a screenshot of the entire thread with the media...
Which one were you talking about, this one? Or?
I just see the video right now. There's no visual behind
sorry,
you.
can we have this?
Yeah, exactly, right. So in here we're losing the context, right? So this is pretty ambiguous. If that thread is captured in its entirety with the media on top of that, is that more defensible because it's the thread in its entirety, or is it just the screenshot itself that you're saying is
the screenshot's fine, and right. It's good practice, of course, to record, to capture that grant of permission. The difficulty we had with this was just that, if you get the screen grab that we've got here, it doesn't tell you which photos the permission has been granted in relation to. But if
it wasn't in reply.
If this was a normal reply,
right,
then the screen grab of of the picture, the request, the grant. Then
I just wasn't sure what you meant by that. That's because we see that pretty commonly with the whole thread intact. If that wasn't just taken out of context.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
And I think there's one more question.
My name is Peter Jepsen from Germany. With my question, I'm interested not in facts, but in your personal opinions. I personally am always amazed at the audacity of photo editors who steal other people's work. In your opinion, are these editors are they just dumb and ignorant, or don't they care about other people's copyrights?
Wow. I should probably give an answer that won't offend a lot of our clients, and say that this is a difficult situation, right? Things are moving very quickly. There are editorial pressures to get the news out quickly and tell the news. That's why that's why we're all here. In that context, there were clearly decisions on risk that. Policy decisions that different newsrooms can come to different views on. And, in the UK, there are news organisations who are very cavalier and will use now, pay later. And, they'll be pretty relaxed about paying later, but that's the approach they'll take. Others will be more conservative and sort of more best practice. I think from an editorial policy decision, I think people would be aware of copyright, but they'd be willing to take the risk and have the checkbook ready should a complaint come. I'm not here to say that's the bad or the bad approach to take, but clearly those are approaches that are taken.
There was actually one question just directly across the aisle from Sue. If you have the microphone.
Hi, Sue Llewellyn. So what should the copyright owner do if somebody does steal their photo? What should they actually do if they find a news organisation has used it and they haven't given permission?
Some news organisations will have sort of notice and take down, report this post type functionality, a sort of there's sort of the normal notice and take down you see on social platforms. That's one way of doing it. The next one, if an eyewitness were to sort of Google something like how do I sue for copyright infringement for breach of infringing use of a photo, there are tons of blogs out there actually with photographers talking about how they should do it and almost kind of pro forma cease and desist letters. And I think one thing to think about, certainly in the UK, is that there are low-cost, almost informal court processes to enable this kind of low-value claim to be brought. And certainly, I've advised clients on the defendant side of having to face these claims, and And those procedures are very much designed for lay people to do without any lawyers involved at no cost. So, if you're going to want to go sort of nuclear, at least in the UK, there are sort of court procedures you can go down.
We're going to sort of keep going. I know there's a few more questions, but we've actually just got another case study to run through, and we're already a bit short of time, so we're a bit late starting. So we'll rock it through, and then obviously hold on to your questions, and we'll have another round at the end of the session. So Adam, if you want to just briefly discuss fair dealing.
So this isn't a slide I want to spend too much on, because it's very legal, very technical, and actually changes depending on which country you're in. But all I want to say, the take-home message is, it's not good enough just to say, I'm reporting the news, therefore I don't need permission because I've got fair dealing or fair use. That there has to be some sort of public interest. Why is this video, why is this photo needed to tell the story? Why do I need to see the picture? As opposed to, oh, it's just nice to illustrate the story with this picture or this video. What's the public interest in seeing the actual images? And is the extent of my use justified by the informatory purpose? Do I have to see the whole video?
Sorry, I realised that the slides aren't... There we are. Bingo, thank you.
But ultimately, from a process, and to actually go to your point, this is a judgment call for each organisation to take as to in what circumstances they rely on an exception. And secondly, for how long do they rely on that exception? Because we're talking here largely about current events and relying on an exception for current events. So A, it has to be newsworthy, but then it has to be newsworthy for the entire length of your use of that image or video. And that will obviously change over time. So a decision in the immediate aftermath of a breaking news situation to use it without permission might be entirely defensible in the public interest. But to be using it a couple of weeks down the line still, the exception may well fall away.
I'm not actually going to ask Adam to comment on this because it's not fair, but with that time frame in mind in terms of current events, obviously these are all taken from the Brussels attack, from the same video that was tweeted by somebody who had received the video via WhatsApp. So it wasn't her video, but she did tweet the video, and it was immediately reported by almost everyone and embedded in online news coverage, credited to her and Twitter. And that's obviously something we've already covered. But I took these screen grabs on April the 3rd, I think 13 days after the attacks. So in terms of current events, reporting current events, these screen grabs, also every example here has been chosen specifically. I don't want to highlight any one news organisation because pretty much everyone's guilty. Guilty is a hard word, isn't it? But yes. The reason I chose these 5 is because they had all taken the video and re-uploaded them to their own media player. So that's another layer of ownership. Some, in many cases, not necessarily during breaking news events, many have learnt now, but some still do. But in many cases, there would be a pre-roll ad to watch before you then got to watch the video if it had been uploaded into a media player. So that's the reason that I've highlighted these ones.
Could we just mention 2 extra points, just picking up on what I've already said. As Jenny mentioned, the person who is sort of credited as being the copyright owner here, Anna Ahrenheim, how do you pronounce that? She didn't take this video. One of the points on the slide is, has the original work been made available to the public? Has it been made available to the public with the permission of the copyright owner? In this instance, I don't think we've got enough information here to know that. But if it was been shared on WhatsApp, and then one of the recipients on WhatsApp has then tweeted it out, then there's a good likelihood that the person who owns the copyright in the video hasn't authorized this video to be made available to the public. So then you're crediting the wrong copyright owner, and B, you're relying on a video that hasn't been made available to the public with the authority of the copyright owner. So you're in sort of potentially double trouble there.
And just to reflect on that, obviously here's the backstory, and then you can see that the tweet on the left, finally Anna post, just for your information, this is not my video, I'm not in Brussels, it was shared with me on WhatsApp. I don't have a name for credit, but please don't use mine. And then we see that 13 days later, people are still doing that. Now, can we expect reasonably that the journalist who sourced it originally from Twitter would then be checking her Twitter account to see if she then later on replied? I think that's probably unreasonable. But it was actually eventually licensed by Storyful, and The Guardian were the only site I could find that did change their...
And what's interesting here is that Storyful have clearly gone and done the work. I don't know if it is correct that Pinchas Kopferstein is the copyright owner, but Storyful are saying that that he is. So that my point about processes and putting the workflows and the disciplines in place, clearly it is possible to do that, and Storyful have gone and done it. My point is that this should become part of the sort of everyday processes for handling eyewitness media.
And in contrast to that, these are the sites, or some of the sites, that chose to embed the tweet. And then, of course, you avoid so much of that getting the credit wrong, so much about seeking permission even. They embedded the tweet. The only risk to them there was that the user herself could have deleted that tweet, which would have left, a gap in their story. But it's got to be a better way than taking the videos, re-uploading them to your own player and crediting the wrong person, I would argue. I don't know if you have any comments on embedding more broadly.
Well, I think embedding is a much lower risk. If you embed something that the copyright owner has made available themselves, then you're not going to be infringing copyright. If in doubt, embed, I think, is a pretty useful rule of thumb.
And also, you're still telling the same story, or there's still the opportunity to tell the story. You're not losing anything, because now, obviously, the player function in tweets means that it's not... Previously, before this existed, you would be embedding a tweet with a link, and it was slightly more clunky, but now it's so seamless.
We've been talking a lot about editing, and I just want to reinforce the importance of doing it. Firstly, I think it probably lowers the practical risk of a complaint, because at least people feel like they've been sort of rewarded for the fact that their image has been used. Obviously there are ethical issues around crediting people who wouldn't want to be credited. For example, if that puts their safety at risk, if they've witnessed something and there could be repercussions for the fact that they are a witness, then of course we have to think about whether it's sensible or not to credit them. But certainly from a legal perspective, if you're going to be relying on the exceptions that we just touched on, for example, reporting current affairs, EU law requires the author's name and the source to be identified, unless this turns out to be impossible. So again, back to process, sort of filling in the credit line should be part of the process for using UGC. And of course, when you're at the verification stage, the thing I first started talking about, capturing that correct credit information is obviously super important. And of course, you will get the correct information if you've done the verification correctly. Now, here's an example of an image from the Brussels attacks. And we see the credit there. I don't know if you can read that, but if you can't, it says copyright Twitter, which, as we all know, is just not right.
And it was originally uploaded to Facebook, if that matters.
Well, sort of triple incorrect, but leave it at that. And finally, the last time I gave this talk was to the EBU in Oslo, and it was this slide. Oh, here we are. It's happening again. I suddenly lost the audience when my notifications were. This was a slide that got tweeted out big time, and you can see why. There's some pretty scary numbers here. The top, the AFP case, really. These are US. The numbers you see are from US decisions or US cases, and that $1.2 million worth of damages for use of 8 photographs. That is a mega thing to have hanging over your head as a pictures editor, for example, to authorize the use and the expense. The BuzzFeed example, now there wasn't an award of $3.6 million. That is what a photographer claimed, because his use, BuzzFeed had an article, 30 funniest header faces, people playing football, and a ball landed on someone's head and they pulled a funny face. The person who took that photograph complained to BuzzFeed and claimed $3.6 million in damages. I'm not for a second suggesting the photographer would have got $3.6 million worth of damages, but that just gives you an indication of the kind of the dollar signs that flick up on people's eyes when this happens. And now I believe that BuzzFeed article became the 29 funniest header faces. The one on the bottom, the Alfonso example, here's our friend CNN again. This was a video of a storm in North America that CNN picked up and then syndicated out to CBC. Alfonso Cutai is an intellectual property lawyer in America. So of all the people you're going to use videos without permission, don't use a copyright lawyer's videos. And in your copyright verification, certainly try and work out whether or not they are a lawyer, because the risks of a complaint are probably higher. And we don't actually know how far that case has seemed to have stopped, and Sam Doubley of the Eyewitness Media Hub has tried to get in touch with Alfonso, but it seems to have gone a bit quiet. But there is the very real probability there of a jury trial to determine damages for use of that video. And in the US, you get statutory additional damages, and you're starting to talk about the kind of figures that the AFP suffered.
We're really running out of time, so I'm just going to briefly, this slide is included more for my benefit, because I'm astonished that now on the front cover of the Times, for example, they would run a photograph with no credit. Is that the way we're heading? If photographs are being sourced online, that a defining photograph would appear on the front page of a national broadsheet newspaper with no photographer credit? That seems baffling to me, and that's just the WhatsApp image accompanying it, and even that was used in the coverage of the story, and even that I think has got its own complexities surrounding the rights, etc., which we haven't got time for. The reason I say we haven't got time for it is because I've promised Adam that it won't all be about hijacking and terrorism, so he would like to share this case study.
This is just a very it sounds a bit of a silly example. I'm just going to take a selfie of me with a selfie, because I told a friend I would do that. But the situation here, this chap, David Bellin, took a selfie of him and a horse, entered it into a competition to win a £2,000 holiday. The owner of the horse complained. This horse, she had taught him or her how to smile. So the owner of the horse thought that she deserved some of the £2,000 worth of holiday. And there was a big fuss for a day or two last month. I was asked to be interviewed on BBC Radio Wales about this. I can't imagine any of you were listening to me talking. More's the pity. Oh, were you? Oh, brilliant. Wow, I finally met my one listener. This is amazing. And I asked him live on air, David Bellin, did anyone ask if they could use your picture? And his reaction was, why would that happen? No one's asked me. Why are you talking about, crazy lawyer man? Why are you asking me these silly questions? And the news presenter said, oh, does that mean that he can go and ask for loads of money from all the different outlets that have been using this? And I didn't answer that question because it would have got me into a lot of trouble with my clients. But no permission had been sought. But this picture went everywhere within the space of 24 hours. Someone from an ex-colleague of mine from New Zealand emailed me the next day and said, just sort of seen this, and I've seen your name in the news coverage of it. Remarkable. And then what happened is that Mercury Press, who are a northwest of England photo agency, got the rights to it, and then it sort of picked up when I was looking to get the pictures to this side. Mercury Press was popping up in the bottom. So what had then happened is that Mercury Press had started charging for use of this image. And I know one broadcaster in the UK who I asked, did you use this? And she said no. Why? Because she knew that Mercury Press had got onto it by then, and she didn't think it would be worth her while having to pay them for what was, a story of very little real interest, even though it was quite funny. So, we're not just talking about the most important stories of the day, hijackings or terrorist attacks or anything like that. Eyewitness media can pop up in any situation, and can trip you up and can resolve in having to pay some money out, like the people would have done to here. And David Bellin won his holiday, and that was that. Hopefully he had a nice trip.
Happy ever after. I think we've got a couple of minutes, possibly at a push, for a few questions. There was one at the front, which we've answered. Fabulous, thank you. There's another one over here. Hello.
Adi, it is working. Hi, Alice Reed from First Draft. This is a question which has actually come through on Twitter, but I think I was stumped because I'm not a lawyer, so I'm probably stumped by a lot of copyright questions. But the video shot that from the Brussels attacks, which came through WhatsApp, and then the source on Twitter uploaded it to Twitter, where it got retweeted thousands of times. Someone said that a German news organization, embedded a version of that video that had been scraped and re-uploaded to Twitter. What are that? So the person who re-uploaded it to YouTube, someone else scraped the video from Twitter, which had originally come through on WhatsApp, uploaded it to YouTube, and then a German news organization embedded it on their site. What are the copyright implications in that quite convoluted situation?
That's a really great example of why copyright verification is so important, because that would have uncovered that situation you'd expect. So what you've got here is sort of two layers of unauthorized use of that video. You have the initial sharing it on WhatsApp, and then from WhatsApp to Twitter without permission, and then you got from Twitter to YouTube without permission. So two different sort of infringements there. The answer to the question of, can I embed a video that has been put online without permission, i.e., can I embed an infringing video, is subject to a reference to the Court of Justice of the European Union. On Thursday, as I was flying out, the Advocate General of the court said that yes, you can, in his opinion, embed an infringing video. However, that has to go to the court still. So we don't have an answer yet to that question, but within the next, depends how quickly the court runs, the next 6 to 12 months, we will have an answer to that question.
Can I just say, all of you taking photos of the screen right now, it's not the handiest handout for a festival when you're probably all about to go to the bar, but we have got a pile at the front, which is our kind of simple guide to the complexities of copyright law. It's also online on firstdraftnews.com with the URL there, or just a simple search on the site. But what we've attempted to do with Adam's help is just kind of talk you through the flow chart of asking questions along the way. What do you know? What do you have so far? And when should you stop using that content? So thank you all so much for sticking around. Hope it was valuable. Thank you enormously to Adam, Rendle, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you very much.